Under Armour has been in the football boot game for longer than you may think. And while they haven't really broken into the mainstream yet, they do have a few compelling options to choose from. And one of those options is the new Magnetico Pro 4 that I have right here. This is Under Armour's second tier offering from the Magnetico series, and it's gonna retail for $140. So in this video, we're gonna talk about all of the new features of this model and also discuss how it differs from the last release. And then by the end of the video, you should have a decent idea whether the Magnetico Pro is gonna be a good option for you. And then if you're interested in picking up a pair of the Magneticos or any of the other boots that we discuss in this video, you can find links to them on sale with discount codes in the description below. Now let's start things off talking about the design. So when I first got the Magneticos out of the box, I noticed immediately that there's some familiar elements that I recognized from last year, but there's also some pretty big changes. Starting off with what was familiar, you're still gonna have Under Armour's clone upper here, which is pretty unique and consists of this quilted and woven material. Each individual panel throughout this upper has its own pillowy, soft feel to it, and overall, I do think it's a pretty cool and innovative upper. Now, Under Armour don't actually have a main leather football boot that they sell, unlike most other brands. However, I will say that despite this being a synthetic material, it does kind of have that soft, plush, natural leather feel to it. And I also think that compared to the clone upper on the Magnetico 3 from last year, while it is very similar in its appearance, it does feel that on the Magnetico 4, it's just a little bit softer to the touch. Now, moving on to what is a pretty major difference between the Magnetico 4 and the Magnetico 3, you are no longer going to have a traditional tongue on this new model. Instead, you're gonna have this knit inner liner. Now, this knit liner also serves as a collar that's going to wrap around your ankle and then continue all the way underneath the lacing system towards the base of the toe box. Now, this knitted design is actually really popular and it's used by other brands like Nike and New Balance and even some other Under Armour models, just because it's going to give you maybe a little bit more lockdown and some uniform comfort throughout the lacing system. Some people prefer the implementation of a standard tongue like you found on last year's model, but honestly, it really just depends on how well this knitted upper is executed. And in the case of the Magnetico here, I think Under Armour has done a pretty good job. The knitted material feels nice and elasticated, pretty premium. It's not so loose that you feel like it doesn't add any structure to the boot, and it's not too tight to the point of feeling restrictive. I also like how this knitted liner connects to the rest of the clone upper. It's a pretty seamless design. It also really reminds me of the Tiempo Legend 10 from Nike, especially the new Emerald version. And then resting on top of that knitted inner liner, you're gonna have the addition of a fairly traditional lacing system here, which is very important because this elastication on the knitted material itself isn't gonna be enough in terms of providing lockdown on the boots. You definitely need the addition of these laces. The interior of the boot is also going to feature some really soft material with the lining along the clone upper giving you this really nice textile feel, and then you're also going to get an extremely plush heel liner towards the back of the boot. And then almost reminiscent of the Phantom GX from Nike, the lacing system on the Magnetico is going to have this slightly off-center design. Now, flipping over to the back of the boot, this is where you're going to notice that there's pretty much no major changes between this and the sole plate that was used on the previous model. You're just going to get these 12 relatively mid-length conical studs that are slightly hollowed out. There's also going to be one bladed stud towards the midfoot here, but because it's a little bit shorter than the rest of the conical studs, it's not going to be making contact with the ground the majority of the time. Now, the Magnetico 4 is advertised for use on firm ground natural grass, but because these are conical studs and it's not an extremely aggressive sole plate, I wouldn't have any issue using this on artificial grass. And then regarding the flex of the sole plate, the stiffness is maybe not quite as stiff as you'd find on the Vapor 15 or the F50 from Adidas, but it has somewhat of a medium amount of bend to it. All right, now that we've covered most everything to do with the design of these boots, let's get into how they feel on feet. So I actually had a pretty good experience with the fit on the Magnetico 3, and with the new design changes with this fourth version, I was actually pretty excited to try these on. And with this lower cut knit elasticated collar, these were actually really easy to slip on and off. And once I got them on feet and was lacing them up, I did notice that you got this really nice, soft, comfortable feel that is pretty common when you have a knitted inner liner design like this. And regarding the sizing, everything felt pretty accurate. I got these in my standard size 10.5 US, and the length was pretty perfect for me. I had just about a half centimeter or so between the edge of my big toe and the end of the boot. So if you are looking at potentially picking up a pair, I would definitely recommend going true to size. Now regarding width, I would say that these are on par with most competing models from Nike and Adidas, so I would say that they're about average in terms of width, especially towards the front of the toe box. They're definitely not quite as wide as certain models you would get from a brand like New Balance. But that being said, there is enough volume towards the front of the boots here to accommodate my feet, which are slightly on the wider side. I do just maybe wish that these boots had an extra half centimeter or so just towards the front of the boots. Now, while these boots felt great as I was lacing them up, as soon as I did get my final knot tied and started walking around, I did notice one slight concern that I had regarding the fit. And that one issue is going to be the lockdown. Now, lockdown is one of the most important things that your football boots need to provide for you, and it essentially has to do with how secure your feet feel in the boots. So if you feel like you have too much slipping around your ankle or heel area, that's usually a pretty telltale sign that the lockdown in your boots isn't great. And with the Magnetico 4 here, I just felt like the heel area felt a little bit shallow, and that resulted in my heel somewhat slipping as I was walking and running around, and that's a pretty common issue that you can find in some takedown boots. Now, there's a variety of factors that could be contributing to that shallow feeling heel. The external heel counters at the back of the boot do feel like they sit pretty low, and as I mentioned earlier, you do get what is maybe an over-the-top, really thick padded heel liner. Now, that being said, there were a few small adjustments that I made that actually gave me a bit more lockdown with these boots. First off, after I had the boots on for about 5 minutes or so, I did re-tie the laces just to make sure that across the ankle area, they were really tight, just on the edge of being a little bit too tight, but just so that I had enough lockdown. Now, another hack that I tried out that I learned from another player, you may find it a little bit surprising, but I actually just removed the insoles. Now, you may think that the insoles are providing a ton of critical support, but honestly, at the end of the day, once you've got the boots on and you're on the pitch, you're not going to notice a huge difference with them in versus out of the boots. But if you do opt to remove the insoles, you are going to get around a millimeter or two of additional volume inside of the football boots, and that's going to give you just a little bit more space, not just in the heel area, but also throughout the midfoot and the toe box. And maybe you could argue that you do get the slightest more stud pressure when you remove the insoles, but for me, the added lockdown I get from the slightly deeper heel area is definitely going to be worth it. So that's a pretty cool hack that you can try with your other boots, and overall, the fit of the Magneticos I was impressed with the only caveat being I wish there was slightly better lockdown towards the heel. Alright, next up, let's talk about what these were like to play in. So after getting the boots laced up and adjusting the laces a couple times just to make sure they were optimized, the fit did start to improve, and these were actually a decent amount of fun to play in. One thing I really liked is that the upper didn't seem to bunch up at all when I was walking or running, and that's something you can notice on some slightly more affordable synthetic boots, but I really liked how soft this clone upper was. And I also criticized the Magnetico 3 in the past because I found that the heel area was just a little bit chunky compared to the rest of the boots, and when you had the boots on feet, it just made for kind of a weird non-uniform experience. But with the fourth version here, between the heel, the midfoot, and the toe box, you just get a lot more continuity in the design of the boots, and that carries into the feel that you get when you're playing in them. In terms of the touch on the ball, you are going to get that kind of synthetic leather-like feel. You get this nice pillowy plush touch from that clone upper and the quilted elements. I will say it's not the thinnest upper of all time, so you're not going to get necessarily a barefoot feel. Now, whether you like that, it's just going to come down to personal preference, but just know it's going to offer a slightly more padded touch. Now, I was testing these boots out on firm ground natural grass, as you can see from some of the stains on this white sole plate, and I thought the traction was great. And as I mentioned earlier, because these boots have conical studs, I wouldn't have any issues playing with these on artificial grass. I will say that I think playing in these made me realize that Under Armour may have taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back with this new model. Because while I do like that they stepped into the future with this new elasticated inner liner, and overall they executed it pretty well, I think the lockdown on this model compared to the one from last year actually isn't quite as good. So if they could deliver on a version with a slightly deeper heel and maybe a little bit more width throughout the toe box, I think we would have a real contender. Next up, let's talk about the value of these boots. So the full retail price of the Under Armour Magnetico Pro 4 is going to be $140, and you may be able to find a deal here and there to bring it down to $130 or potentially $120. But keep in mind, since these boots are pretty new, it may take a little while before they start to go on sale. And when it comes to that price point, $140 nowadays is actually pretty common in terms of second-tier takedown boots, and that's likely a pretty good deal when you compare it against Nike and Adidas. And when you consider that the feature set that you're getting on this Pro version is very similar to the feature set you get on the $250 Magnetico Elite, overall it does seem like a pretty fair value proposition. But I will say, when you get into boots that cost around $140 to $150, I'm going to be expecting a really great fit, and I do think that that's an area where these boots could improve. And that's especially the case when you consider the great competition around this price point, which we're going to get into right now. So while the Magnetico 4 is a great boot with a cool upper, it doesn't quite nail all the little things like some competitors do at this price point, starting with my personal favorite second tier takedown, and that's going to be the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Emerald. Now the Legend 10 Pro is only going to retail for $130, but its feature set and design is basically identical to the $220 Elite version. And similar to the Magnetico Pro, the Legend 10 Pro is going to deliver you a really nice synthetic leather upper with kind of a quilted diamond pattern design. It's also going to have that knitted inner liner similar to what you find here, but the lockdown and security you get with that boot is just going to be a cut above. And while aesthetic preference is going to vary person to person, I actually think that the Legend 10 just looks a little bit better than the Magnetico. If you have the chance to try on both boots, I definitely would, but around that $130 to $140 price point, I would absolutely recommend checking out the Legend 10 Pro. And then if you're on the market for a slightly more premium option that just does everything a bit better than the Magnetico but still has a similar core feature set, I would recommend checking out the New Balance Tequila V4 Plus. Now the Tequila is one of New Balance's flagship models, and the V4 Plus actually only retails for $220, which is actually on the cheaper side compared to other top-end boots. But the Hypoknit upper that you get on the Tequilas is one of the best on the market. The upper is extremely comfortable, the toe box is wide and has a nice anatomical fit, and unlike most other brands, New Balance actually offers the Tequila in standard and wide variation. And then finally, if you are set on the design that you get with the Magnetico here, but you're looking at potential better alternatives, I would actually recommend checking out the Magnetico 3 Elite that was released last year. Now the Magnetico 3 is going to have a traditional tongue, unlike the knit enclosure that you see on the 4th version here, but that being said, it is a really great boot, and you're actually going to get slightly more lockdown out of that Magnetico 3 than the Magnetico 4. And while it was initially retailing for around $250, since it's been out for a while, you can actually find the Magnetico 3 Elite on sale for around $160 to $180. And so as always, once a boot's been out for over a year, that's when you can find some really great deals. So what are my final thoughts on the Under Armour Magnetico Pro 4? I still think Under Armour has some really cool design elements in the Magnetico series, and to date, it's still, I think, the best looking boot that Under Armour makes. I think closer to $100, these boots actually would present pretty good value, but until they go on sale, I would definitely recommend checking out some of the competitors I mentioned around that $140 to $150 price point. And then when Under Armour do go ahead and release the next version of these boots, I want to see an actual improvement to the lockdown, especially in the heel area compared to this variation. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. And please let me know in the comments below if you're interested in me trying on the more expensive Elite version, just so I can give an accurate comparison between the two boots. And please let me know in the comments below if you're interested in me doing a full review of the Elite version so I can give a comparison between the two models. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like if you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.